Welcome and congratulations on checking out this free video training. I am so glad that you are here. I am Stacy Rocklein and I'm a certified professional coach, but a teacher at heart, and I have a mission to provide resources for people who are trying to quiet the part of their inner world that's causing them suffering and strengthen their connection back to love. So let me tell you a little bit about myself and then we'll get started. I will start with a story. And this is the story of my birth, but not my physical birth. It's the story of my birth as a seeker and a student of this kind of work. And I was 27 years old, feeling like I was going nowhere. And that isn't because I wasn't motivated. I was a really ambitious person, and I was a junior high math teacher. And I'd done a ton in the 5 years I've been teaching. I got my master's degree. I wrote textbooks, taught teachers, trained them how to use these textbooks, spoke at conferences. I was the department chair. I mean, I'd done a lot, but I wasn't seeing a lot of fun, other new, exciting avenues to take. My friendships, people I love dearly, were just kind of stagnant and stale. We weren't excited about stuff anymore. We weren't really growing. I had been married for 7 years at this point, and I knew I wanted a family someday, but I was definitely not ready yet. So that box was going to have to wait. And I was uncomfortable. I was bored, and the beautiful part about being uncomfortable is that sometimes you're really ripe for a new idea, and that was exactly where I was. And I was watching Oprah every day after I would get home from teaching. And I've been watching her for years, so I am sure that she introduced me to all kinds of wonderful teachers and perspectives and ideas. But like I said, you don't get, teaching can only happen when the learner's ready. Teachers are there, resources are there. The learner has to say, yes, I'm ready to learn that in order for you to actually have teaching and learning. So here I was, really uncomfortable in my life and bored, and this book came across my attention through Oprah called The 4 Agreements. It's a little book, quick read. I highly recommend it. What this book, the idea that I was left with was that I could change my thinking, and by changing my thinking, I could change how I felt. And this totally blew my mind, because the way I saw it, I could learn more things and stretch my intellectual mind, but how I felt was out of my control unless outside circumstances changed. If they changed, then I would feel something different. And I was always thinking I wanted to change my reaction. You know, I feel angry and then I act angry. And so I'm like, I don't want to act angry, but I never thought that I could actually change feeling angry. It was all about the outside reaction. This book taught me that, and I was just blown away and born. And from that moment on, for the next couple decades till now, and it's ongoing, I have just been gobbling up and absorbing every new idea that seems interesting to me. I'm so curious, and this book leads to this book, to this teacher, to this course, and I've been on this path of self discovery and self-empowerment, and ultimately the path back to love. And that is why I am so passionate about being somebody along your path who might be able to add something to it, just by sharing what I've learned and how I've come to kind of organize it and understand it. And that is part of why we're here today, to learn about the ego. So we're going to cover your spirit, humanity, the emotional system, and then we'll get to the ego. These are some big topics, huh? So let's start with spirit. And please understand that these are my beliefs, and they may or may not align with yours, but they're all I've got, and that's how I filter what I learn. And I believe that everybody has a spirit. Everybody has a spirit. Some people might call it the soul, and it's just this inner core that is unbelievably beautiful and brilliant and bright and absolutely perfect and completely and totally unique to you. and it is pure love. So you've got this unique spirit that's pure love, and you're like a drop of water. So when you get put into the ocean, even though you're unique and perfect and your spirit is pure love, then you're connected to every spirit everywhere and you become one. You're one with this source or divinity or God or energy, whatever way you want to understand it. And I just think of it as pure love. So we've all got this spirit. And our spirit will remain intact no matter what happens. We're going to go through this whole human life, and at the end, our spirit will be just fine no matter what happened. Maybe even with this kind of work, we'll be able to evolve our spirit along. So that's what we've got. And we have this knowing within us what it feels like to be connected to love. But we're human. So we also have the thinking mind, and it's such a gift. I mean, it's amazing. Look at what we do with the thinking mind. You know, the thinking mind wants to understand and put things in order and categorize and you know, just try to understand everything that it's receiving, all of the data that's coming in. And that's wonderful when we're working on a math problem or something like that. But when it comes to matters of the heart, categorizing and separating is not going to get us closer to love. That gets us farther away from it. So it can create a little bit of a problem for us when it comes to our heart, as wonderful as it is. So let's... The part that's lost in translation for the thinking mind is, even though we have this knowing of what it feels like to be connected to love, because the mind is always separating and trying to understand, it translates into belonging. So the driver becomes wanting to belong. And belonging, you can feel the judgment in there. You know, the mind is really always judging. It's very good at that. So there's belonging and then there's not belonging, right? And so that's going to be rejection if we don't belong and approval if we do belong. So you can see that it's similar to like the kind of acceptance that's in pure love, but not quite the same thing. It's getting lost in translation. But that is the basis of our emotional system. And so let's go to that for a minute. We all have this emotional system. It isn't a bad or good thing. It's just what happens, and it's valuable for us to understand how it works. So we receive data. This can be something that we witness, that we hear, see, something that we think, and that we take that and we put this into our emotional system, which is really like a machine, okay? It's a machine, and inside this machine, and I'm going to get into more detail, inside this machine are our beliefs, our core beliefs, our belief system, and judgment. And so it takes that piece of data and it measures it against the beliefs and decides whether it aligns with rejection or approval. And what gets spit out is an emotion. And our beliefs are completely, totally unique to us, just like DNA. They're all different. And that's going to determine what your emotional response is. So sometimes we think that we're just having a thought and then we have an emotion, see something and then have an emotion. But there's a machine working in between those two things. And understanding that is one of the steps along this path, because then you can start to tinker with it and make adjustments. The emotions just happen. We don't have control over those. Those are just going to come up, but they're based on what's happening here. So let's talk about beliefs and the belief system, where they come from. How do we end up with these beliefs? Lots of different ways. One way is that we might just be handed these beliefs. So I was raised in a Catholic family, and my Catholic family handed me my Catholic belief system, and I was like, okay, those are mine now. Sometimes we have cultural beliefs. So if you think about being born in the 50s, the culture has one belief about what women can and should do, as opposed to being born now, where your culture has a different belief system about what women can and should do. So sometimes it's that. Sometimes it is patterns that you see, and you develop a belief system from those. So let's say you grew up in an abusive house, and you watched as dad abused mom. Well, let's flip it since I just talked about women's rights. Let's say mom abuses dad. It doesn't matter. Mom abuses dad, dad forgives. Mom abuses dad, dad forgives. Mom abuses dad, dad forgives. That's a pattern that you watch, and it's going to result in a belief for you. And who knows which way it's going to go. One belief you might come out with is abuse of all kinds is unacceptable. One belief you might come out with is, oh, all loving relationships have a little bit of abuse. Who knows? But you're going to have your own that came from watching that pattern. Other places that beliefs come from are your circumstances. They influence you. So somebody who's coming out of a household that was very affluent is going to have some beliefs about money that might be really different than someone who comes out of a home that was in a poverty-stricken kind of environment. And the last one I want to talk about when it comes to beliefs is trauma, because we all have trauma. Now, you've noticed that every belief I've talked about, I keep relating back to being a kid. And that is because that we do change our beliefs over time, and especially if we really purposefully focus on them, we can. But we developed a lot of our belief system when we were young, and that's just how the human mind works, I guess. So you can have a traumatic event, and every single person I've ever met in my entire life has had a traumatic thing that happened to them as a child. It doesn't necessarily have to be like abusive or a tragic event or on purpose. It can be relatively harmless, but it's how it affects that person, what belief it puts in place that then informs how they feel throughout their lives in a negative and in a suffering way. That is what makes it traumatic. So I'll give you an example from my life. I was young, very young. I don't know how old I was, but I had long straight hair, and that was the 70s. So that's what we did. My mom trimmed my hair one night, and she handed me the scissors and said, "Go put these away." So I went into the bathroom, and I climbed up on the sink because I couldn't reach unless I climbed, and caught my reflection in the mirror. And I had this hair, this little clump of hair hanging in front of my face because I had just been climbing, so no surprise. But what I thought was, oh no, she missed a piece. She made a mistake. Being the helpful little girl that I was, I picked up that hair and I cut it. Help her out. Let's finish the job. I don't think that this was the intended look my mom was going for. And the result was that I was punished. And back in those days, often that was spanking. So I was spanked. And, that was humiliating because I was a pretty good girl and I didn't get that many spankings. But here's the worst part. Our priest was coming over that night for dinner. And I was very upset. First of all, because this had all been over a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to be naughty, but I felt like a bad girl anyway. And I felt like, oh my gosh, when he finds out what happens, God is going to know. And then I am going to be disgraced, literally, not worthy of God's love. And that turned into a core belief about making mistakes. Making mistakes should be avoided at all costs, because I was connecting it back to like rejection by the divine. Think about how harmless of a little situation that was. I mean, it was kind of a nothing, certainly not intended by my, parents, or I don't even know who punished me, to hurt me that way or to affect me so profoundly. But here I was. And so look at how you might behave if you have that belief. And I became a perfectionist, somebody who had to get everything right. That is a very hard viewpoint to operate from. If I did make mistakes, I would do everything I can to avoid that. Blame someone else, rationalize to myself, just so I don't have to be uncomfortable there. So that turned into a core belief. Now, a core belief is something that's like so deep within you, and it triggers really strong emotional reactions, core beliefs. Other beliefs are sometimes easy to let go of. Like eventually I looked at my Catholic beliefs and thought to myself, those don't really align with what I believe to be true. And those were easy to let go of. Those weren't core beliefs. So here's our belief system. So we've got that. That's in this little machine. And then we get a piece of data, take the belief, judge whether we're talking rejection, approval, good, bad, right, wrong, and then we have the emotional response. So let's say that you see some devastating news on TV, which happens in our world, is happening right now all the time. And you've got a belief of, people are supposed to be kind to each other. So someone shoots up a place and you get that data and you put it into your emotional system, into your machine, and you decide that that is terrible and judge that as, a rejection, not of you, of love, whatever it is, and then you have an emotional response. Now, people are going to have different ones. Maybe you have a really strong belief about justice, and you might get angry. Someone just might have it be a really compassionate belief, and they get sad. It just depends on the person, but it goes through machine, and then you get your emotional response, where on the surface, it just looks like you heard the news, you had the emotion. Let's say you witness a beautiful, compassionate act between two strangers, someone who helps someone else out. When that goes into your emotional system and your machine, that's going to spit out a different emotion. That's going to, make you feel touched, happy, something like that. So that's how that works. Now, what we need to talk about is the ego. Because the ego, the ego is like a little supervisor running around the factory and this machine here, and if you let it, will be totally in charge and wants to run everything. Now, the ego doesn't have to worry about things that don't relate to you, and we just had a couple of examples of something that comes outside and you process and have an emotion. But when it involves you, personally you, then the ego's awake. I'm here. And we can let the ego be like a very loud boss, or we can shut the ego into an office somewhere and decide that they're not going to be in charge. That's some of the work we need to do. But let's talk about the ego. So the ego's job, their total job, her total job, his job, whatever, is to protect you. Wants you to belong more than anything, will do anything in order for you to belong. Does not want you to be rejected, will try to avoid that at all costs, wants you to be approved of, and wants you to belong. That is its function. How does it do it? Well, it looks at the data that's coming in and decides what that means, if you're being rejected or if you're being approved. And let's say that it's something that's coming from outside of you. Here's an example. When I teach a live class that's kind of a new class, I give a feedback form, and the purpose is to hear people's feedback and make adjustments so that the class is better. This is like junk food for the ego. Oh man, the ego loves this. If I have the ego in its place, then this is just my thinking mind taking the data, adjusting the class to make it better. But if the ego is active and I'm letting the ego run around and be in control, then I might get a critique, put that into my emotional system, and the ego decide that, that's a rejection of you. And especially if you've got beliefs like it has to be perfect, or making mistakes is bad, I'm going to have the emotions that go with that critique, against belief, judged as a rejection or bad. Out comes my emotion, of feeling unworthy, disappointed, that kind of thing. So what if I had gotten a positive comment? A positive comment, The ego, if it's very active, well, they love a positive comment. The ego will give you all kinds of love and praise and then stab you and treat you terribly. It just depends on what evidence you're getting. So then the ego is like, oh, great, it was perfect. Everybody said, oh, that was perfect. Okay, this is good. This means you've been approved of. You belong, and you get pride or whatever emotion goes with that. So sometimes it's outside things. Sometimes when the ego is really active, this little menace is just looking around your life and inputting thoughts into the emotional system. Like, you got a bonus, good job. And then you're going to have a approval, happy, and it goes out and you have those emotions. It can just be looking around and being like, man, you are out of shape. It's just a thought. It's not even an event. It's not coming from outside of us. It's just the ego looking around, criticizing what it sees. Or even remembering. Remember that time that you made this mistake, you failed at that. When the ego's bored, it'll just pull that stuff up. So it'll put that through the machine, these thoughts, and you're going to have the emotions that go with those coming out the other end. So if the ego is super active, I mean, this thing is running the show and is running around, looking at your life, looking for ways that you are being rejected or approved. When it's really active, it will even take things outside you and turn them in on you. So let's say somebody gets a promotion and you've got a belief that a promotion is a great sign of success. So if your ego's not involved and you've got your ego in check, you might take that data, put it into your emotional system. It might come out neutral. It might just be, oh, I'm happy for them. But sometimes the ego will turn that into, hey, you haven't had a promotion in a while. And then that lovely piece of news for someone else is now a failure on your part. The ego is using that to judge you, to say that you haven't gotten something done. So now it's kind of like an attack from the inside. And that's why we have emotions like shame and guilt and self-loathing spit out. Because the ego wants us to do things that cause us to belong and to get approval. And when we don't, it gets mad. It gets mad at us. And that is the squawking voice that you've got. And as long as you have the ego and the ego's in charge, even though the ego wants you to belong, and that is like that knowing that we can be accepted and loved at our heart, as long as the ego's in charge, you cannot get to spirit. And spirit is where you want to be. And sometimes you think, because the ego approves and sees that you have approval, and so it gives you all these happy feelings. You're like, oh, I got a good comment on my Facebook post. And then you're happy. That is not happy like at your base. That is not the spirit-based, love-based, happy, no matter what happens, happy. That's an ego happy. Sometimes they're confusing and you're not quite sure what's going on. But we have to quiet the ego and we have to put the ego in its place in order to be connected to our spirit and get back to that place of love and contentment and truly happy. And we've got to work with it because the ego exists and we need to have ways to do that. So what now? What now? You've got the short game and the long game, basically. The long game is, and I'm going to congratulate you for playing because you're here and you're watching this. So you're committing to the long game, kind of. You can continue to commit to it. That is, in essence, trying to get back to your spirit and trying to get connected back to love. That is the end game. And the process of doing that is to tinker with that machine, get in there, find those beliefs, be aware of them, look at them, examine them, decide if they're working for us or not, where they come from, why do I need these, do I want them? Because once we kind of tinker with that machine, we're going to start to feel better, depending on what beliefs are in there. And the other thing is to start to work with the ego and to get that ego down in the office that's in the basement, not running around the factory floor, creating a lot of problems for us. And this is just a journey that you take as a human, and you'll take it forever. I'm still on it. I'm still learning about myself, but all the time I'm cleaning up in here, and I am more content and more happy as I learn how to work with those things. And so that's the long game. And my hope is to help people on that path. and be able to be one little piece of it, or even significantly helpful if that's how it works out, but to support people on that one. Short game is this: we get triggered. Period. It just happens. All of a sudden, boom, we're having an emotional reaction. We're really stuck. And it totally caught us off guard, or we even see it, but we just can't get out. And we need tools for the short game. We need tools to be able to get that emotion in check, shift away to a different emotion, and move ourselves away from suffering and away from pain, so that we can live that content life. And so we need now tools. And I'm happy to provide those as well. So I would be honored. I'm honored that you're here already. And thank you for watching this. And I hope it was useful to you. And I would also be honored to provide anything that you need that I've got to offer that could help you with your short game or with your long game, and be that support. I would just like to thank you and wish you a love-filled day and a love-filled life.